Hello and welcome to Season 4 of On the Irregular with me, Java Berry. In previous seasons, I've chatted to women from all walks of life about their unique creative journeys, how they got here and how their story has shaped their creative process. For this season, I wanted to specifically explore the way in which grief informs the creative process, how transformative it can be, and how it weaves its way through our lives in many tangled ways, how it manifests in our work, and how we navigate the endless twists and turns. I cannot wait for you to hear these conversations. Each one moved me in a profound way, and often made me laugh and cry simultaneously. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to On the Irregular Season 4 on creativity and grief. In this episode, I am talking to calligrapher, bookbinder and writer Gaelle Jolly. Gaelle and I have followed each other on Instagram for many years, and it was a joy to finally meet over Zoom. In this chat, we talk about our shared love of writing letters, about Gaelle's passion for getting lost in imaginary worlds. We talk about losing her husband and how Instagram helped her process her grief. We discuss the dangers of placing all our self-worth into our creative process, and how fruit is only exciting when it is wrapped in pastry. Welcome to my chat with the delightful Gaelle Jolly. A warning, this episode contains swearing and conversations on death. It also contains some background hammering noises from the workmen next door. Thank you so much, Gaelle, for joining me here for On the Irregular. It's so lovely to meet you finally face-to-face via Zoom. As I was saying earlier, I've followed you for ages on Instagram, your beautiful account, Inky Square, and I've since signed up to your Substack, and all of your musings and your writings there are so beautiful. You really, you cross both the visual aspects and the words of the internet just so delicately and magically. So yeah, it would be lovely if you would like to start off a bit about yourself, your background, where you're from, a bit about your creative journey. Over to you, really.
First of all, thank you for having me. And it's also lovely to meet you because I also have been following you on Instagram for ages. So yeah, I feel like I know you, but we've never spoken before. So I'm originally from France, but I've been living in the UK for 25 years now, almost all of that in Oxford. And these days I'm a calligrapher and bookbinder mainly, with a little bit of paper making and letterpress printing as well. I bring all that together to make stationery and paper goods, trying to bring a little storytelling magic into the everyday. That's the idea. I'm also a cat owner, and my cat just jumped off my lap and really distracted me there after biting me. She loves me really. I also work part-time as a library assistant at the moment in the Radcliffe Camera, which is probably Oxford's most recognisable building.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time I'm in my home studio in my house, my Victorian house by the river. So that's what I'm up to these days.
And did you train, did you have any formal education in terms of like librarianship, or did you have any ideas when you were younger what you wanted to be? Because it seems like you're very much immersed in words and in so many ways, writing them, reading them, and offering them out to people and organizing them.
Yeah, so like a friend, when I got the job at the Bodleian Library, a friend told me, "Oh, this is great. You're going to be a keeper and maker of books," which I really liked as well. But my background is a little all over the place. But I didn't train to do any of the things I do now, not formally. I have various degrees. I'm one of those people who got a little bit addicted to university.
Oh, wow.
So I studied English back in France, so modern languages, but
Mm-hmm.
English for me. Then moved to the UK, did a degree in sociology. And then I went back to university later on after working, doing slightly random things as well. Like I worked in mental health for a charity. I worked in a bookshop for a bit. I worked in marketing within publishing, and then went back to university. Decided I wanted to work in the heritage sector, historic conservation, that kind of thing. So I did an MA in cultural heritage studies. And I did work in the heritage sector for a bit. Then went back to studying to do
Oh, wow.
well, it was going to be a PhD, but chickened out and turned into an MPhil, looking at the management of historic cemeteries. And so, and then I was at the same time, I left the heritage sector to start working in communications for a university and went back into the heritage sector. It's just kind of back and forth. So a
Wow.
lot of my kind of more traditional working life career has been in between, going in between charities within heritage and historic conservation and doing communications for in the higher education sector.
Yeah.
Bit of a like going back and forth between those things. So yeah, heritage and yeah, old
Wow.
buildings,
Yeah.
the historic environment, that's what I was really, really passionate about and really wanted to work in.
Hmm.
Although it didn't, I never quite managed to find my way. It's a really, really competitive sector full of annoyingly well qualified people. It's very hard to compete.
Yeah.
And yeah, I ended up leaving as well after my husband got ill. I was working in London at the time and doing this really stressful job because I was under-resourced. I didn't have enough time to do all the work, and I was kind of getting on the coach at 7 in the morning to get
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
London. It was a bit insane. And when my husband got ill, it was just like that. This makes no sense anymore. It doesn't seem worth doing. Um, so then, yeah, I got a job in Oxford. So that's when I kind of got back to working in communications for
Hmm.
a university. And yeah, the all the stuff that I'm doing now kind of came little by little, but more recently and much later on.
Hmm.
The writing was kind of always there. So I I did enjoy writing when I was like in my teens, like journals and letters to friends. Do you remember writing letters to
Oh
friends?
my
Oh, you're
goodness.
younger than me, but
No, I
like
was no, I was an obsessive letter writer. Absolutely, yeah, 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 yeah. I think also because we moved country as well, so and emails didn't exist, So from like age 10, yeah, I had about 20 pen pals, and I'd keep all of them really ordered, and I had them in suitcases until about 15 years ago, and then eventually I just had to let go of them, and I feel so sad because they're a diary, aren't they? They're a diary of a
yeah.
time.
Yeah, I mean, we used to do this crazy thing. Like you would see your friends all day at school, speak to them on the phone at the end of the day, and also write them letters.
Yeah.
Like, what was that? What did we find to talk about? It's kind of as a 14-year-old with
Yeah.
absolutely nothing happening in your life. What
What
was
did you
that?
find to talk about and write about? I know there's something
It's
quite
just
deeply
bizarre.
romantic about it, isn't there? In a kind of often in a way that only teenage girls can be with each other. It's all of
Yeah.
these heartfelt letters and conversations. Yeah.
No,
So
that makes me wonder, is that what we're trying to do now? Like all of us sharing stuff online, you know?
that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, you're kind of essentially like sharing your scrapbook with your friends, sending out little
Yeah.
notes, and that's such a good. Yeah, I'd never thought of that. Because like, yeah, on your like in your websites, there's a bit about you, and you saying that as a child you wouldn't have considered yourself to be a creative child, but you were lost in imaginary worlds. You loved getting lost in
Mm.
books, in films, and daydreams. That's where that's where you found your creativity, as well, where you could let your imagination run free. um and that's interesting because it does kind of then that I see that thread through what you're talking about, history and heritage and time travel in a way, through buildings and through history, cemeteries. So it's like you're finding your way still, or you found your way through as an adult through just similar things. We kind of like find different ways of translating what, so often I think like, yeah, what we're into when we're children, when we're teens, we somehow just kind of carry the threads of that into the rest of our life, don't we? And try and make a living out of it if we can.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's interesting because I was kind of trying to, do that thing. I need to write about my story for my website. It's that I find it quite difficult to find the connection, and then suddenly that, oh no, of course, like
Yeah.
yes, it's obvious because there is that here, and you often hear those stories of people are being interviewed or telling their stories as creatives. It's often that story of, oh yes, I was always sitting at the kitchen table drawing when I was a child. I'm like, well, I didn't. It always feels like that's the traditional story of people who are involved in any kind of visual
Yeah.
arts or visual kind of creativity, that it's something they've always done, and I'm just like, no, I was really rubbish at drawing. I just couldn't do anything with my hands. I was terrible. But actually, I mean, partly that's because I didn't get to try the things that I do now, because
Yeah.
that just you try art at school and it's that kind of draw a thing with no teaching involved usually either. It doesn't help. So I thought, that's not for me. I can't do that. But yeah, as you said, there's actually a link through storytelling, which is what a lot of creativity is about,
Yeah.
storytelling. And
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're so right there about how, I think a lot of people, yeah, you do talk to them like, oh, I was never creative as a child. It's like, well, maybe you just weren't offered, you didn't have access to that medium, because there's so many different ways of being creative. That's exactly it. And you have this kind of often a very narrow idea at school of like, it's whether you can draw a face or a fruit bowl or, something like that. But actually, like, there's just, creativity can lend itself to so many different things. And it's as much the tools and what you find interesting. Unless you're going to find something interesting. And what you clearly find very interesting is words and history and the work that you do as a calligrapher and your bookbinding and your printing. It's quite kind of romantic and poetic, and there is definitely a historical element to it, like visually also, like how how you capture it as much as how you create it. And I guess because calligraphy is also it's an ancient form of, what would you call it, an ancient form of writing, because it's so much more than writing, isn't it, stylistically.
calligraphy actually just means beautiful writing. It's the art of beautiful writing.
It's the art of beautiful
Etymologically,
writing.
that's all it means. And yeah, different it's a different way of writing, that you basically slow down and you use particular tools that make it look more beautiful,
Yeah.
essentially. But yeah, it does come from more um, historical tools to write with. So
Mhm.
you can write beautifully with a biro, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically, if you think of writing with a brush, which you do a bit of,
Yeah.
which I can't do, that's too clever for me, or the kind of nib I use, which you have two kinds of calligraphy nibs, but the flexible nibs I use, but the other kind, which has got like a flat edge, is the
Hmm.
same idea. It's all that kind of thinner and thicker lines,
Hmm.
and the tools naturally create that.
Hmm.
I mean, naturally, you can know how to learn it, but it's that kind of applying pressure or turning the angle, so you get those. And that's what, like, most calligraphy styles are
Yeah.
characterized by those thin and thick lines. But if you think back to older writing tools, that's what people had to use as well. So yeah, old handwritings can look quite similar to well, that's the thing, as well, people were taught to write in a certain way. And I actually really like to push calligraphy as close to handwriting as possible. So you kind of write in calligraphy quite slowly. It's meant to be like taking all the strokes apart, and the idea that you're drawing the letters rather than writing.
Hmm.
I quite like to go as fast as possible and try to make it closer to handwriting as possible, even though it's still pretty slow. But so yeah, I find that interesting, because when you look at older handwriting, people wrote so much more beautifully than we do these days. And I was taught, because going to school in France, I was taught French cursive, which is hideously difficult and complicated. But my natural handwriting is still a bit of a mess. And so I don't know if it's partly people were taught differently, and partly they took more time. Like people took more time over everything, didn't they? But yeah, I do like that spread of continuity in things like writing and printing and
Yeah.
all that kind of thing. But yeah, trying to reconnect to those older styles of handwriting, doing
Yeah.
calligraphy, I like doing.
So how did you come to calligraphy?
Yeah, I very nearly didn't learn because I thought I'd be rubbish at it. But I had this really, I think I was really itching to do something that was more creative in a practical sense and with actually making something, creating something visual, is what I mean. But I came to that because I thought that's something I couldn't do. I came at it very slowly and tentatively.
Yeah.
So I started by, well, I got interested in things like, I guess, graphic design and typography, partly because I always did a bit of my own design in my jobs because I never had any budget for anything. And I'd always liked things like, like handwriting, like rubber stamps when I was little, typewriters, loved playing with my mum's typewriter, so much so my parents gave me a typewriter for Christmas one year. I still have it.
Oh wow.
And all that kind of thing I'd always liked. And I thought, oh, that's like getting into that kind of thing. That's a way, like I could create something, but I wouldn't have to do the bit where I have to use my hand to create shapes, which seemed impossible.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing I did was actually learning, doing a letterpress printing course. And I never really took it anywhere because I didn't really have access to, printing press. I would have done, but I was too scared to go to the open studio. So then I did a bit of lino cut printing. As like, yeah, I can just about, if I just copy a design and just like carve around it, like that's not too difficult, I can do that. And making my own rubber stamps and that kind of thing. And then calligraphy was starting, we're talking about 10 years ago now, I guess.
Okay.
I wasn't on Instagram or anything, but I was on Pinterest and started to see more things like that, kind of lettering arts. So it was becoming a more kind of visible thing, and there was a revival in it. And I thought it looked beautiful. And I'd like to try. And yeah, I very nearly didn't because I thought I wouldn't be any good at it. But I thought, oh, do you know what? I'll try anyway. See what
Yeah.
happens. I just took an online class. I just joined Skillshare and ended up taking several online classes on Skillshare and just taught myself that way and became completely obsessed with it. Like for a while, it was just like all I was thinking about was like commuting at the time to work, and I would like draw letters in the air sitting on the bus like a nutter. I was just really obsessed with it. And yeah, so that's how it started. Just thinking, oh yeah, I'll take an online class. It
Yeah.
will probably be a abject failure, but we'll see what happens.
And it really wasn't, was it? Wow, that's so gorgeous. It just made me think about my eldest son. He's 7.5, and we're really not the kind of parents to put pressure on him to like do activities or but just sometimes there's a few things that turn up at school and like maybe this could be good, a bit of gardening club or music club. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And I was just trying to explain to him today. I was like, even though you think you don't want to do it, and because he's like, I'm just going to be terrible at it. I'm not going to know how to do it. I was it's like, just give it a go. Just give it a go because you have no idea. And I was just having this conversation with him this morning on the walk to school. So this is so comforting to hear you say that because now I can go back to him and say, you know what? I've actually spoken to somebody who is a perfect example of this. Trying something with such low expectations, but then discovering a whole world in it. Isn't that amazing? That it just like it clearly just like hooked into something in your brain and you just went with it and flew with it.
Yeah, and I think I really now believe that there's a way of, if something appeals to you, there's probably a way that you can do it. I mean, not that it matters being good at something. I also do things I'm not good at, like knitting. I'm not good at it, but I still do it because it's fun. But if you want to even do something seriously, there'll be a way. So even with calligraphy, like, oh, been attacked by a cat again. I don't know what she's doing.
That was a perfect curve across the laptop screen. Amazing. cats.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, carry on.
Uh, yeah, like I was saying, I don't do brush lettering. It seems really too difficult for me. And I'm sure I could practice and get better at it. But
Yeah.
it's like for me, it's pointed pen. It's the thing that works for
Oh,
me. So even within one sort of fairly narrow discipline,
yeah,
you can still find something that's a better fit for you. And
yeah,
it would be so easy to say, well, I've tried this one thing and that didn't work, and to give up. But actually, it's worth even trying variation on the themes.
yeah.
And I think I think you've got to have that. It's got to appeal to you. Like
Hmm.
you want to go and try something that you think you're going to hate. It's
Yeah.
just not. But I think there's always a way. There's always some kind of, yeah.
Yeah, that's so valuable. I think that's so, so true. Like we were saying earlier about, yeah, but like, just creatively, there's such broad spectrum of things that you can experiment with and lend your hand to, but then that's also applicable to, like you just said, quite narrow methods and areas. Like that's so good to, yeah, to remind yourself that even within there, you can probably find something that you can, yeah, lend your hand to. So I'd like to talk to you a bit about your writing as well, because that's a big part of your creative practice. And you write so beautifully and eloquently and thoughtfully. Would you like to talk to me a bit more about that? And because you talk also a lot about losing your husband and your grief, and working through your grief with your creativity, and how they often seem quite go hand in hand with each other. I'd love you to tell me a bit more about that, if you could.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the sharing about grief is something. So for a long time I didn't. When my husband was ill, that's when I joined Instagram at the point when his health took a very dramatic turn for the worse. And just coincidentally, I had just joined Instagram like a few days before something happened to him, which like really had a massive impact on his quality of life. And his cancer had come back a few months earlier. We knew it was incurable. Things were pretty grim. And I just happened to, just on a whim, I've joined Instagram. And so I started kind of creating there and getting more serious about calligraphy and practicing that and getting interested in, that Instagram format, which I know people love to hate on Instagram these days, but I still love it as a little kind of creative form, like a
Yeah.
picture and some words and telling a story with a picture and just a paragraph. Yeah, for me, that's still the thing
Yeah.
because I kind of started sharing things there. And
Hmm.
while my husband was still alive, this was all very like um indirect. I didn't say what was happening. So I was drawing on my feelings, I was expressing things, I was escaping through it as well. A lot of escapism.
Hmm.
Um, but I wasn't sharing anything openly. But then after he died, I did start telling people what had happened.
Mm.
And that little format of some words and a picture is how I basically, and I wouldn't go out and give it as advice to people, like go and process your grief
Yeah.
on Instagram publicly with strangers. But it really works for me.
Yeah.
So
Whatever works, Jesus. Yeah.
that's what I did. Like actually that process of taking a picture, writing some words, it was it was really a way for me to observe what was happening to me and
Hmm.
understand it and process it. Um, and then it turned out that, oh, people are really responding to this. Like they actually find it interesting and moving and helpful, I was really, honestly, I was just doing it for me. I didn't initially think anyone would find that helpful, me talking about what was happening. But they did. So my Instagram became a lot of sharing about grief. And yeah, initially the writing was really those really short, Instagram captions,
Hmm.
nothing very long at all. Um, but yeah, and at the time it was things like I was thinking about it, it's really strange because I was in this fog of grief, but at the same time there was a lot of clarity. Like I would notice things. And that landed itself perfectly to those little snapshots. So there's a post I remember doing. It's not very long after my husband's funeral, and I don't know, I'd put some fruit because I don't know, had like a few people coming to my house around the funeral. I don't really eat fruit except in tart form, so I had this leftover fruit, and I mean, honestly, it's just not that exciting. It's not, doesn't have pastry involved, and I decided to bake something for myself to use up this fruit, and it was like, that sounds like such a small thing, but it was such a big thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to make a tart just for me. I'm not doing it for me and my husband or for him as a treat. I'm just doing it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I took this picture, which was just my hand on the dining room chair. You could see my wedding ring, which I was still wearing at the time. And I was just about to sit and eat that tart that I'd baked for myself. And I just wrote a caption about this process of, doing this thing just for me. So that's the kind of thing that I was kind of capturing and sharing.
Because you use a lot of like aesthetically, just thinking about your images on Instagram, there's lots of greys and shadow and sorry, there's almost kind of like a smokiness. It's really gentle, and almost like slightly gothic in some ways, like not in a kind of like tacky goth shop way, but there's just like kind of like they always make me think a little bit like if Edgar Allan Poe had photos in his books, they would,
Oh, wow.
they would be yours. And it's always really struck me. I think I remember that photo actually that you just mentioned. And so did the writing these small captions, did that then encourage you to did it just incite a feeling to want to write longer form and write more?
So that took quite a long time. So I only started my Substack about a year and a bit ago. So
Mm-hmm.
over a year now. Um, for a long time, I didn't really. So there are two elements to that. So first, I don't think I was quite ready to write in more at more length
Mm-hmm.
about things. And the second thing was that I didn't really have a home for it. And I was starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable about mixing, because at the time I started talking about all this stuff on Instagram, I was doing a bit of paid work, bit of calligraphy work, and I launched my first product at the time, but it was still very much more of a personal thing, even though it was also a business account. But then as I did more of the business side, I had this kind of strange thing going on. It's like, yes, like I want to carry on talking about grief on Instagram. I talk about it in my newsletter. I'll talk about it in all sorts of places. It's part of my story. But at the same time, it's like I'm not going to write extensive blog posts about that on my website when I'm trying to get people to go and buy
Yeah, of
stationery
course.
from me.
Yeah.
So there was a practical issue as well, that I didn't want it to take too much space, and
Mm-hmm.
it didn't really make sense in the context of the other stuff I do. Um, so yeah, so it didn't have a home. It's just when everyone started getting excited about Substack, I thought, actually, that could be an opportunity to have it sit in a slightly different place. But yeah, the other side of it was that I think I wasn't quite ready to share more until fairly recently. And um, part of that, I think, and it's not about it having been too raw or anything, it's just things weren't clear. I think it all felt a bit muddy, and I blame the pandemic for that partly. I think there was, I had this sense of clarity when I started sharing this stuff. And then, then lockdown happened. And yeah, I got stuck in this life. I was all ready to kind of be open to change and new things, and
Yeah.
and then I got stuck on my own in my house. And things got really. So I mean, I don't know, because I don't know what the grief process would have been like without the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic. That's the
Yeah.
only experience of it I have. I remember talking to I got some bereavement support via the wonderful Sobel House, which was the hospice where my husband died. They offered this fantastic free support. And and talking to the volunteer who was helping me out, she compared it to, she used this, I'm probably going to get it all wrong because I'm really bad at remembering details of things people have told me, but she used this metaphor for grief, which is comparing it to a volcanic eruption, and how there's a stage of it which is the ash cloud. And she said, and she found this with me and other people she was supporting, that the pandemic meant that we were stuck in the ash cloud for longer because there was no seeing ahead, because there was so much uncertainty. You couldn't do the things you wanted to do. You couldn't make the changes you wanted to make. And we just, like, it's easy to forget now, but like we had no idea how long this stuff was going to go on for when the world would reopen. And she said, that's what it is. You're stuck in the ash cloud. It will pass, but it's just taking longer because of the situation. And yeah, I remember around the same time her asking me to describe my grief to her, just something like, sometimes I just couldn't do it. It was just, I don't know, like everything was such a mess of, I hate being so much on my own. I hate my job. I mean, it was a perfectly nice job, lovely colleagues. That just wasn't for me. It just brought me no joy at all. I find it really stressful doing it from home as well. I was in a relationship which had difficulties attached to it, partly because we were both having such a hard time living in lockdown. It was just like all this stuff was all mixed up, and I couldn't tell the grief apart from this other stuff. And I'm not thinking that that's pointless to try to take it apart anyway, because it colors everything. But I think because of that and long period of time when things were so messy, and I couldn't talk about grief. I talked about it less on Instagram as well. I mean, I talked about all sorts of things about my life, so I guess I was talking about it without realizing. But it was just too unclear to really take apart and take themes out of it, or I feel like I had any kind of, not wisdom, but anything to impart about it. So yeah, it took a while before it got to a point where I started thinking, oh yeah, I could talk about this, and I can look back now and I can talk about it more clearly.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's the thing about grief. It is so personal and different. There are often similar things for different people, within the grieving process, but it's also still so deeply personal. And some people that I've spoken to and experience that I had was that all I wanted to do was get the words out, kind of pinpoint it all. But I'm also a deeply impatient person, and I sometimes wonder how much of it was me trying to speed up the grieving process. It was just like, I need to understand it. I need to understand it so I can then move on, which of course is not the way it works. But then I was talking to someone recently as well about how important she feels that it is to not rush that and to not try and force yourself to create anything with your grief, because you just also need to sit with it and be with it. And it is violent, or it can be violent and unpredictable enough that just sitting with it is going to take up all of your energy, and kind of just have to be taken by it, don't you, for a while. And so that's interesting. You're saying that, like, it was, and that visual of the volcanic ash, the cloud of ash, is so perfect. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's such a brilliant way of putting it. And like you were saying, that you found it hard to talk about because I guess you're in the ash cloud, and it's not clear, and it's, I think you kind of garbled your words in a way that I really understand so clearly. That just like, yep, exactly that. And
if you'd asked me at any point in, the last 4 and a bit years how I was doing, I'd say, yeah, I'm fine. I'm doing fine. And then you look back and I think, oh God, I really wasn't. But I always thought it was fine. So yeah, so that I'll just accept, like, I'm probably still not fine. I think I am probably not, because it is, yeah, it just never ends. It's not like you're going to get to a point where you're fine. It just takes different forms and shapes, and obviously it gets easier. But yeah, I still like I remember in the early days, like that feeling, like I've I was lost in what I call the fog of grief, but I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I was seeing friends and spending time with people, and I thought I appeared perfectly normal to people. But then I felt the fog lift. I said, oh, I feel more connected to the world suddenly. And I remember describing this to a friend, saying, oh yeah, over the past few days, I feel like, it's the fog has lifted. I feel, and she was kind of nodding along, like, oh, okay. Was it that obvious? I had no idea. So clearly everyone else could tell that I wasn't quite with it, not really there. But yeah, I thought that was fine. So yeah, I fully expect this to carry on.
There'll just be another layer of fog, and then maybe one will come down and settle again, and then lift again, and yeah, and then it goes. But
Yeah.
I think it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, because it's like that thing is like, does it get easier? And I think it does. I think it's like you just kind of learn to live with it in different ways, don't you? And it's not always as raw. I guess that's what I've really kind of experienced, that things aren't always like, sometimes they are, and it's often unexpected, but it's not as raw on a daily basis. And in some ways, there's some very beautiful things that I've found through grief, and um, so in some ways those can make it a little bit easier, even though they're still entangled a bit with pain. There was something I think it was the first person I spoke to about for this season of the podcast, about her experience of grief, and she said something about how life grows around the grief. And I just imagine this like old glass bottle, and that's where the grief is, and then there's lots of plants and branches and flowers and trees growing around it, and thorns and everything, but it just keeps on going. It just keeps on going.
Yeah, I like that image too. And yeah, I think it's something I was kind of realized and thought about like this year or earlier this year. I was trying to fill that gap actually, and I kind of didn't realize I was, except looking back, yeah, I explicitly did say that's what I was doing, but also didn't realize it. So I was trying to basically replace love in my life. Well, I have lots of love, different kinds, but romantic love in my life, with my work, with my creative work.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to do. And I had explicitly planned to do this. Like, yeah, I was spending time on this stuff before my husband died, because I needed it. I needed it then to survive through what was happening, but I knew I would need it after he died as well. And that's what I tried to do. Like, this is going to be what brings meaning to my life, because I mean, that's the thing about grief being different. It's like it's different for everyone personally. It's also different depending on the role that the person had in your life too. And for me, my husband was like, that was what my life was about. Like, he was the center of it. That's, he was how I was useful to the world, because he needed me. It was what brought meaning to my life. So it's about missing the person, but it's also about, suddenly I have no idea what my life is about. Like, I don't know. I mean, of course I have friends, I have family, but I didn't have, like a fabulous career I was really involved in that was very meaningful. So it was, I just like, I need to fill this as well as everything else. Like, it just such a massive gap in terms of how I bring meaning to my own life. And that was, my creative work was going to do that. It was going to do all of it, Java. That was going to be it. And then my business does not do well financially, and so that started feeling like, I am failing at everything. I am useless. It just started being quite damaging. And then I realized this was really bad for me. And yeah, I started trying to think of it, trying to zoom out onto my life. That's how I thought about it. And that's why what you were describing about life growing around grief, that's kind of, it's the same kind of idea. It's a different idea, but it's kind of similar. So I decided to zoom out and try to think about all the various things in my life that could bring me some of what I needed. And, you know, made a list of things I need, you know, values or whatever you want to call them, and trying to think about where they came from. And yeah, that's been really helpful because I do have this visual idea as well that, you know, grief is in the middle, it's there. And instead of trying to fill that gap, I'm going to make it look smaller by zooming out and adding more things around it. So it's not about one thing filling it, it's about building up all sorts of beautiful things around it.
That's such a beautiful way of looking at it. That's perfect. And so how are you feeling now at the moment with your work? Is there less pressure on yourself on its value and its place?
Yes. I'm getting to a stage now where I feel like I can again start try, because I haven't really been doing a lot of marketing and selling this year because I needed to take that pressure away from me, and I'm lucky that I don't actually need this to live off financially at the moment. So but I'm getting to a stage where I feel like yes, I feel in a more kind of psychologically safe position to actually start trying harder again. But yeah, it feels like I have a much better balance. So I took on part-time jobs. I had two, I've lost one, I've still got one, to have that kind of another kind of separate thing, another kind of work to do, and one that's with other people, not just me by myself in my house.
Yeah.
And yeah, my Substack is part of this idea as well, and I really do want to do more with that as well. So it's also a separate thing, and it's also connection. It's also kind of trying to feel like I'm contributing something, because that's something that that has been missing for me. And if you're doing work and then you're not selling it, and it's like, what am I doing this for? Like, this is just a hobby. It's just a very time-consuming hobby.
Yeah.
So yeah, now I feel like there are more things in my life, a better balance, and like I can, not that I'd stopped focusing on my creative work, but I feel like I can safely focus on it now. It's not going to take on these massive proportions that are then, you know, that are then bad for me.
That's such a valuable perspective on it, and it's something, if I'm honest, and hearing you talk about that, about the pressure you put on it, I think that I can really, really relate to that actually. And because there are so many elements of it, like you're saying, you know, the financial aspect and the way we kind of mark a success and all, you know, of our creative work. And yeah, so what is, if it's not bringing in income, then is it just like a really time-consuming hobby and all of this, and the way that we the expectations we have of ourselves and our work. And that's so interesting, and that's so wonderful that you're able to give yourself that time out and to know, right, you know what, maybe I need to focus on some other things, so that it's not just all this pressurized thing of like it's all got to be on that. So that's incredibly wise, as well as the knowing how important it is to find solace in that creativity, but also not to lay everything on it.
Yeah, and I think there's also been a process of separating things out. So I used to talk about the stuff I make for Inky Square, for my business, as being linked to that grief story, and that never really felt entirely true. I mean, yes, I did make some things shortly after my husband died, like a handbound album of photos from his last birthday. I did do a couple of things like that, but actually that's not really what I do most of the time. Actually, like I was saying before, like a lot of the creativity for me is about escapism. That's what it was when So yeah, some of it, the writing is more about talking, it's more talking about grief, and some of the other stuff as well. But when it comes to making stationery and paper goods, it's actually more because I find it fun. It's about stories and escaping in another world, and evoking the past and fiction, and it's all about that. So yeah, separating things out a little bit more now. So I see, so that's the stuff that I do for my business isn't so wrapped up in the grief story. And it's a subtle shift. I mean, from the outside, it looks exactly the same to anyone looking at what I make. But the way I was kind of conceptualizing it was different, and the way I was talking about it. And yeah, now that feels a lot better as well from that point of view. Like some of my creativity, the writing, is still about talking about all this stuff, and some of my Instagram posts and that kind of little storytelling with pictures occasionally is as well. But the other part is about fun and all the other things I'm interested in. Doesn't have to all be this all untangled quite so tightly.
I can see that. I really enjoy whenever your posts pop up on Instagram, or an email comes in through Substack. It's like I always try and make a bit of a quiet moment to properly, first of all, look at the photo on Instagram, because it's always like you're so imaginative, and so there's so much thought put into your photos, and they're so beautifully framed, and often quite painter-like actually as well, or painting-like. And your words, I always kind of want to, just like read them quite carefully, because so much thoughtfulness and reflection goes into them. So yeah, no, I just wanted to say again, like, how much I appreciate you sharing, your thoughts and your creativity with the world. I really enjoy it. And it always makes me think, and it always makes me pause and just take a moment. So that's, it's very powerful.
Thank you. That's such a lovely compliment.
Oh, thank you so much, Gaelle.
Thank you.
And thank you to your cat. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Honestly, that leap, it was just so bad.
She's normally very peaceful. She doesn't like me basically paying attention to anyone other than her. So,
You can find Gaelle on Instagram at Inky Square and on Substack. Please head to the show notes for links. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of On the Irregular on Creativity and Grief. Please remember to review and subscribe, as it makes all the difference in helping other listeners find us.